This live stream rebroadcast is brought to you by thecreators.com. That's CREATOURS.com, an online Patreon-supported community for all things creative. If you want a creative boost through mentoring, video instruction, and a private community, join us at thecreators.com. Hey everybody, welcome to another live stream Monday. I am your host, AD. You guys already know that, I know. I originally was going to do the best 5 apps that every photographer needs on your mobile device, but I'm still pulling all of that together. It's really difficult to stream live mobile devices for everybody to see, especially across one Apple device and one Android device, and I want to show you all of those. So until I can pull that together, which will probably be next week, I figured I'd throw this one in there because it kind of came about because of an article that I read. I'm not going to mention any names because that's not me, but it did affect me. So I read this article about Lightroom and its ability to create 32-bit HDR images and how great it was. And years ago, when they first introduced HDR from within Lightroom, of course, I've been using HDR processes since late 2007. It was basically, there were problems with it. And when I went to Adobe and I talked to them, they're like, well, it doesn't actually process it doesn't give you back a 32-bit DNG file. It gives you back a 16-bit file, and that's why it's different from what you get from Photoshop, which does do 32-bit. And so I read this article by a very famous photographer dude, educator, and I just put a comment on his blog and said, hey, why would you say, that it's 32-bit? I said, if you just process this without doing the tone mapping, you get a nice 32-bit image and it comes out really, really well. And then today he did a kind of retaliatory post on his website. And he was saying, Adobe engineers say happens and it is 32-bit, and this, you need to turn the sharpness up by 40%. In order to get it to look the same. And I'm like, all right, maybe I'm missing something. Maybe they've changed something in Lightroom, because before I just jump out there and make a decision on, an opinion, I like to make sure I'm educated. So I went and did some tests this afternoon, and yeah, it's not true. So I wanted to share with you guys my HDR knowledge and why I'm where I'm at and why I preach the 32-bit. So I want to do a head-to-head comparison. I have a great shot that warranted HDR that I can show you that's very current, and maybe it'll give you some insights and let you try things. Now remember, whatever I tell you tonight, this works for me. You're going to want to test these things for yourself. So just, watch the video over a couple of times if you miss something. But, you can go right straight to the end and be like, yeah, that's what AD uses, so that's what I use. But I always encourage people to try each of these because you might find it works different for you than it does for me. Through the years, I've found out this process works for me. So let's get the screen share going, and then let's talk about why we use HDR in the first place. So let me get that going. You guys should be seeing my screen. I moved the chat to a different part up here. You can see it's up at the top now. It's a little less obtrusive than on the side. We get to see more of the screen. So, all right. So let's start out with, I'm going to talk a little bit about my workflow, and then I'm going to talk about, first of all, though, when do I use HDR? Because I don't use it all the time. Cameras today can gather anywhere from 12 to 14 stops of light, which usually is plenty for most work. And this was a case where I was shooting a sunset. I was shooting into the sun. And as you can see from the exposure that I have up, which is a dark one, actually, we're going to work on this bracket right here. Let's start with that photo, because this is the middle exposure. This is where I set 0 at on my meter. So you can see here that the sky is blown out. You can see that there's, if I asked you to say where the sun is, you could probably guess it's kind of right in there, but it's not very well defined. But if we look at one of the darker exposures, you can definitely see right where the sun is at, and all this definition in the clouds now appears. So this was a case where, here I don't have, you can't see the buildings though. You can't see the star of the show here. And so you have to go to a lighter exposure in order to see that. And then this end exposure, which is a +4, it allows you to see all of this stuff down here, all this wood and textures and all that kind of stuff, which I wanted to show as well. So that's why I would use HDR. If I wasn't processing in HDR, I could probably get a decent photo out of this if I pulled down the highlights and did a lot of manipulation, but there would be noise in areas and there would still be some blown out areas that I really probably couldn't fully rein in. So I like to use HDR so that I can point that light to where I want. I've got about 6 programs that I'm going to process this same set of brackets for you guys tonight, and then I'm going to compare them and show you why certain programs don't make the cut for me. And I figured by showing you that way, you can evaluate like, well, I don't do that, so that doesn't matter to me. So maybe that helps you make a choice to the HDR rather than me just saying, I use this one, so you should use this one, which is never a good thing. So because your use case may be different than mine. So this was right down the road from me. And this is a little place called the Boathouses on a lake where I live now. And I'm very fortunate to have this as a backdrop. So I shot my 5 brackets. This is from the left to the right is a -4 exposure, a -2 exposure, a 0 exposure where my meter said that it was right in the middle, and a +2, and then a +4. So I'm going to combine all of these together and make a big fat file that I can then manipulate all that light together. So the very first thing that I always do is I'll take my middle photo, the one that I can kind of see the most on, and I'll go through and I do some basic settings in Lightroom. Now I've already done these, so I'll show you what they are though. I'll click my camera profile and I'll choose camera neutral. I don't like to have any enhancements to start out my processing, so I'll use a neutral setting, which gives me the flattest photo that I can possibly get. If I was to choose, let's say, camera landscape, watch the green, and I'm pointing, like you guys can see where I'm pointing, but if you look at the lower right-hand corner, watch the green. See how much bolder that green got? I don't want that yet. I may want it in the end, but right now I want to make sure this is a very flat photo for HDR. The problem is when you add those bold colors, they're great for single exposures, but in HDR, if you do that, remember, I'm going to multiply it times 4 or 5 different photos that are all going to be layered. That's going to get so blown out crazy that it's not going to be, you're not going to be able to process it. So by starting with these flat settings, you basically can get the most flat color picture profile to start your processing with. So that's why I do that. The white balance here, I generally for sunsets use a little trick I like to do for sunsets to make them golden like they were when I was there, is to use the shade white balance. So that gives me a nice golden warm look to the photo. Then I don't do any other adjustments. No exposure, contrast, any of that stuff. I don't touch any of those. They all stay zeroed out. And then I scroll all the way down and I'm going to check the remove chromatic aberrations, which is the little areas. Now this lens doesn't have any, so I probably don't even need that. In fact, I'm going to turn it off for this. But where there's high contrast, like on these roof edges and you have light behind them, some lenses can reflect inside the lens elements and it causes little fringes of blue and purple and magenta colors around these areas of bright contrast. I don't really have that here. There might be a very little bit of it. I don't think so. This is a Zeiss lens, and they're usually very good about their internal coatings, so you usually don't have that happen. You do see that a lot on older film lenses that don't have those coatings, or cheaper kit lenses usually don't have those coatings, so you'll see chromatic aberrations. You click that little box, it gets rid of them for you. Then you want to check off Enable profile corrections. This is going to change if I turn that off, you'll see the picture will bow out a little bit. That's the distortion of the lens, or bow in this case. So what this is doing is fixing that lens distortion. So that's what that does. And you can see my lens profile here. It's a Sony f4 Zeiss, and it had onboard stabilization. It was a 16-35, and so on. So that's all I need to do. So once I have all of that done, I want to make sure that all of the photos, the other photos are selected, by the way, while I'm doing that. So you just want to make sure that you click on the first photo and then click on the last photo and hold down your shift key while you do that, and it'll select everything in between. If I was to click down here, it'll select all of those. I just want those 5 because that's what we're working on. I select my middle photo, which is the one I make the adjustments on, and I've done everything with. And now I'm going to click the sync button down here on the lower right. And you're going to get this dialog pop up. And then I just want to make sure that check all is checked off because we want every photo to be exactly the same. Now I'm only going to do this once and then we're going to run all the programs. So I'm just showing you what the kind of workflow prep is before we start our HDR. We're going to synchronize all of those photos together. And that means all of those settings now have been applied to each photo equally. And now we're ready to send those photos off to our HDR software. So tonight we're going to be looking at specifically processing in 32-bit. And the reason why I use 32-bit is because it generates a raw file made up of all of the data from all the other files and does no tone compressing. So it just gives me a raw file back that I can totally manipulate all on my own without using tone compressing and letting a program say, oh, you only need these tones in this photo. I don't want any of that. I want the raw file. That's why I shoot in RAW. That's why I want RAW, is for raw HDR. And it gives me a very natural looking HDR that does not look like, you know, the garish, like, you know, if I want that look, I'll do other things. But generally, it just gives me a nice, flat, full range image that I can paint the light wherever I want it, which is what our goal is really in processing HDR. At least at the beginning, that's what our goal is. All right, so we got all of our photos matched up. Let's put it into some programs and see what we get back. We're going to be comparing tonight the Lightroom built-in feature, the Photoshop Pro HDR feature, the Photomatics 32-bit plugin feature, Aurora HDR, and another program that I just got that I really like, and it's kind of a weird program, but it's called LR Infuse, and it's very interesting and different. So I wanted to show you guys that as well, and then we'll talk about all the files when we're done. So let's get right into processing with the first program. Let's just do let's just process it right here in Lightroom without going anywhere. So we'll go ahead and do that. And when I do that, it calls up this window. Of course, it pops up on the other window because that's where it's going to pop up. Now, the advantages to using HDR within Lightroom, it's fast. There aren't a lot of settings. You can deghost somewhat, but you have no control over it. It's basically just a quick and dirty way of making an HDR image. Keep in mind, it is not a 32-bit image, no matter what Adobe says. It's a 24-bit image. And I think what they're doing is they're saying like 8 bits of that is used up by file data or the header or something like that. So it's a 32-bit image. But trust me, when you see these two images side by side, you're going to be like, wow, that's not a 32-bit image. So I'm going to go ahead and just process this with the basic settings. We're going to auto align it. I'm not going to use auto settings. So the reason why I have this checked off, if I check this, it will automatically tone the photo for me, and I will have less control. So I want that turned off. I'm not going to use deghosting. There is a bird here that will show up as like 3 birds, but I don't really care. I'm doing this for speed right now, so I'm not going to deghost it. I'm also going to not have it create a stack, because when you do that, it shrinks all 5 of those files down to 1, and then I have to unshrink them just to show you other programs. So we'll go ahead and hit merge. And another feature that's nice here is that now that it's done that, I can go on about doing something else if I want to. I'm not going to run anything else because I basically have OBS and everything running all together here, and I really don't want Lightroom and Photoshop and everything running at once because it would probably hurt the quality of the stream. So we're just going to let it process, and there it is finished. It just finished, so it's pretty fast. So the thing I like is it's in the background, it's fast, it's quick, it's easy. I don't have to think too much about it. But sometimes you get what you pay for, so just keep that in mind. All right, so here's our first file. And immediately, I don't know if you noticed that, but look at the photo there. And then when I click on this file, look how it sort of, the file, it kind of comes towards me. And I don't know why that is. It's shrunk my file just a little bit. I really don't know why it does that. We're going to look at all of these files, by the way, in Explorer so I can show you all of their data. This particular file comes in at, and this is all going to be important in a little bit, it's a DNG file, which is okay. I don't mind DNG. It's, that's Adobe's version of RAW, they say. And if we look at the details here, we can see that it is indeed a 24-bit. So just like I said, 24 bits plus 8 bits for the data of the header of the file makes a 32-bit file. It's kind of what they call a 32-bit file, but when I talk to someone at Adobe, and I can't say this person's name, but when I talked to this person at Adobe, they were like, it's not a 32-bit file. I can guarantee you it's not a 32-bit file. So I don't know, Adobe. You're telling one person it is, and one person it isn't. So I don't know who the other person got their information from, but the person I got my information from, to me, is very trustworthy. So when I had questions, they came forward and they were like, no, it's not. It's a 16-bit image. So whatever. So anyways, that's what it reports as. The other thing I find really strange, it reports it at 96 DPI, which DPI does not matter, by the way. What matters is the dimension of the file, which here it says is a 1024 by 683. That's scary. And then down here, though, when I hover over this file, let's just move this over here so it's out of the way. We're going to come back to that when we compare files. And when we come down here and we look at it on Lightroom, it says it's 7928 by 5288. So it's a big file there, but the Windows says it's a small file. I'm going to trust Lightroom because I actually looked at the file in Photoshop and it is full size. So I don't know. I don't know why it reports the wrong thing, but it is 24-bit. I did check that. It does report that in Photoshop. So that's our first file. So let's just mark that as a 3-star file and let's process again. So we'll select our first file, hold down Shift, select our last file, and this time let's try it in Photoshop. So I'm going to be really daring and try to run Lightroom, Photoshop, and OBS, and YouTube, and Patreon all at the same time. What could happen? All right, here we go. Merge to HDR. Now that's opening on another screen. As soon as it opens, I'll move it over here to the main screen. If you guys have questions, by the way, remember, if you're watching on Patreon, click the View More, and there's a link there. Come to YouTube and watch, and you can ask questions in the chat. If you have questions for me as I go, please shoot them in chat. I'm going to see them on the screen, and I'll make sure they get answered. By the way, hello to Mike out there. Jan, I see you out there. Looks like we have about 5 other people out there, too. I'm not sure who's there, but say hello to everybody so that we can all meet each other. All right. We're getting there. All right. It's loading. All right. Here it comes. There it is. All right. You guys should be seeing it. That's Photoshop. And it's doing other things like it. I don't know. It's got windows popping up all over the place. So, anyways, it's lining files and doing all sorts of things. Which I knew this part of it I was going to have to like pedal a little bit because we have to wait for the stuff to process, which takes a little bit of time. But I think it's better to process. I could have done these ahead of time. I think it's better to process this stuff in front of you guys so you can kind of see what it looks like, and it gives you a better idea on how I do this stuff. So, all right, here it is. This is the Merge to HDR Pro in Photoshop now. So this is a different program. And in here, we're going to make sure that remove ghosts, that's not checked. We don't want to do that. And then there's also a little selector here. It's usually set to 16-bit. Now, instantaneously, did you see the difference between 16-bit, I just did that, and 32-bit, which it was displaying before? Because it uses these algorithms to basically adjust the scene. Look at all these different algorithms, exposure and gamma and highlight compensation, and none of these make me very happy. But 16-bit, that makes me happy. It's a flat image. Looks like I have everything there. And then you can actually control what this preview looks like. Now, I said preview. This isn't actually changing the file. There's a pointer in the file that tells programs like Lightroom what to display the file like. So it gives it kind of like a window in the entire file to look at that raw data and say, use this. So I like to pick one that's kind of in the middle, right? That gives me the best representation of both the highlights and the shadows, and everything's kind of balanced. So I'll kind of move this slider around till I'm happy. It's just a matter of taste, whatever you like. It will not affect our final processing at all. We'll be able to move the exposure back and forth. You'll see when we get done. Now, if this bottom box here, the complete toning in Adobe Camera Raw is checked, you can check that and then do your processing in Camera Raw, which works just fine. It looks just like Lightroom. If you don't have Lightroom, that's the best way to go. But you know, you can get Lightroom and Photoshop for $9.99 a month. I'd get both of them because you're going to need them. So I'm going to send this back though to Lightroom. So I don't want that checked at all either. So the only thing here is 32-bit and then our little slider to kind of get it to where we want. Now, if we were deghosting the photo and doing all that, that's a whole other workflow, and we're not going to get into that tonight. I just want to do the comparison. So we'll go ahead and hit OK and get that going. And that's going to go ahead and process. It's making the file. It's over here. There it is. Everything's on another screen because I usually work on the bigger screen over here. So when I do broadcast, we have to work on the small screen. All right. So we got our file. That's all we're going to do to it. Right now, all we're going to do is go ahead and close it. It'll ask me if I'm going to save. I'm going to say yes. And it saved it right back into the original Lightroom. And there it is, right there at the bottom. It's already starting to display. So now we have another file. Now, in this blog post that I read, Adobe assured him that these two files are the same. That the only difference is one is a TIFF and one is a DNG. So here's where the argument for me came in. So if I check this file and check and see what its file properties are. Let me make sure I have the right file. That's not the right file. Okay, we'll use that one. There we go. And we'll do file properties. All right. So here is the file I just processed. It's a TIFF file. And I apologize if these are really small. So just trust me on what I'll read them to you. So, all right. So we have the DNG is 125 megabytes. That's pretty small for raw data, but they say they have some magic that they can crunch it down. So, okay. And that 8 bits, remember, is what you lose because they need that room for their saying how to spread the data back out, apparently. Over here in the TIFF file, uncompressed, we have 482 megabytes. Now, that's a big difference. It's like 4 times, right? Close to it. But if I look at the details on this file, we're going to suddenly see that the details here are quite different. The dimensions are proper. First of all, they read proper. The DPI is now 300 DPI, magically. Again, doesn't matter. But now the bit depth is what I'm looking at. The bit depth is 96. 96-bit. I don't even know how that's possible. So I still think this is weirdness. That's like 3 times 32 if I do my math right. So I don't know. I don't know what a 96-bit image is, but I know it's not 16-bit, that's for sure. And I know it's not 24-bit with 8 bits lopped off. We got that figured out. The big point of it comes where Adobe said that the only difference between these two images, and I'm going to put these side by side so you can see them. So we do X, Y. You see, that's my image there. Let's put 3 stars on this one so we know what they are. Okay, so we have the select and the candidate. So let's just see which one this is. That is the Let me just turn one off so I can see which one's which. Let's see if I take this to 4 stars. Okay, so which one's the stars? Come on, buddy. No, it's comparing the other two. Oh, boy. Compare those two, please. Thank you. All right. Oh, it just wants to compare those two. All right. I can't D-star them while they're in the compare mode. So let me just do this. I want to make sure I know which file's which to show you guys. So let's just reduce 1 to 2 stars. 2 stars. There we go. All right. Compare. All right. All right. So this is the DNG over here. And this is the TIFF file over here. So there is a difference in the exposure. You can see it right off. If I zoom in, whoops, if I zoom in right here, you should be able to see that. Come on, DNG. Got to wait for it to finish. You can see that the exposure is a little blown out. That doesn't really matter, and I'm not too concerned with that because I'll actually be able to pull that back, I'm sure. The one thing that I'm noticing, though, if you look at the roof, look at the difference in the roof. Look at how sharp this is. Look at the difference here in the side of this. It just apparent to me, this right here on the front of this building really shows to me, look at how sharp this is and how blown out. I mean, even the tree back here looks fuzzy. And so Adobe's suggestion is that we need to go to the develop module. And what we should do with our DNG files is now crank up the sharpness. Instead of going to 40, we need to go to 80. That's what they say. So let me just make these two images both equal as far as their exposure goes. You can see this is just a little different, so I'm going to pull it back a little bit so they kind of look close. Go back a little bit more. Come on, slow computer. All right. So they're pretty close now. Yeah, pretty close. All right, let's go back to our compare and look at those. I'm not going to do these for every single one. It's just this basic argument that I want to address, and then we'll move on to the full comparison to everything else. So here we go. So here's these two images side by side. And again, I have to wait for this preview. You notice the TIFF is already loaded and going. So here it looks like it's a little better. Looks like it's a little better, but it still doesn't look as sharp to me. I'm looking down here in the water, looks a little different. It's not the same, no matter what they say. And I don't really, by bumping up the sharpness, I'm going to get noise in certain areas of the photos. So it's not the same. So right now, my candidate between the two of these would be, I would use Photoshop over Lightroom for HDR so far. So far, the TIFF file is my top photo. So let's just go on to the next processing, and we'll see what we can come up with next. Let me get the right photo selected here. We're going to give that 5 stars right now, and right now we're going to give you 1 star because I don't like you. All right. So remember, Lightroom is the 1 star. Photoshop is 5 stars. Okay. So next, let's go check out my tried and true software, which is the 32-bit plugin for Photomatics. Now, you guys may have used Photomatics in the past, and you probably use their interface that pops up and all of those little controls that they have on the side. I'm not going to use any of that. Actually, I'm just using the engine to assemble the files and bring them right back into Lightroom as a full 32-bit TIFF file. You get this download from HDR Soft, and you register it with your regular Photomatics register code, and this is like a little bonus thing. They stopped advertising this when Lightroom came out with its merge function because I think some of the technology went to Adobe. I can't prove that, but it's awfully odd that suddenly that Photomatics was like, we don't want to confuse people. I'm like, well, it's not confusing. It's a different program, but that's their choice. But they still do allow you to download the 32-bit plugin. So that's what I'm using here. Going to do that. And these 5 photos are now going to go into the merge to 32-bit plugin. I don't need to align images. I was on a tripod. I'm not going to remove ghosts. I'm going to reduce noise in the normal and underexposed images, and then we're just going to merge all these together. So we'll go ahead and hit that. I'm going to bounce off my processor and probably kill everything, but we'll see where it goes. How's everybody doing tonight out there? Good, I hope. Coming towards the middle end of summer here in upstate New York. Planning an autumn workshop in New York. So autumn waterfalls and beach lake shots. like the one I'm working on tonight. I hope to announce that soon if anybody's interested in joining me for 4 days in upstate New York. I'll get that out to you guys so you can check it out. Also, next week, in case you missed it at the beginning of the show, next week we're going to be doing the 5 apps that every photographer needs to have with them at all times on their phone or tablet or whatever they carry around with them. And I'm sure a lot of you can guess a couple of those apps, but I hope that a couple of them also will surprise you. Great, Mike. Good to hear it, man. Hope everything's good over your way and you get your PF Sense all sorted out there, man. Oh yeah, I would love to get out. I got to get out and back on the bike here before we lose all of our summer. I spend too much time behind the screens, so need to get out a little bit more. You can see there's some other shots I have here from there too as well, but if we have some time left here when we get done, I'll go ahead and share those with you. So that's finishing processing in the background, and usually it will pop up. It's a little slow because of the feed. Yeah, I don't know why that is either, Mike, because you go public with it. The only workaround that I've seen that people do is have like an announcement video that they do. Mike's talking about like when he goes live, it always sends a thing out to Twitter, but it doesn't give you a link, so you can't like actually go and watch it from there. And then when he's done with his show, it posts a link. So it's very confusing because I've said, we go live and we love the viewers that show up, but we'd like to have more because the more the merrier sometimes. And every once in a while, by the way, if it doesn't show up, I'm just right-clicking on the folder and selecting Synchronize Folder, and I can synchronize that shot back in here. Now, also the other thing to check is down here I have Custom Order selected. If I change that to Capture Time, you'll see the photo appears. It was actually at the bottom because it was last to be processed. So just make sure you don't have that checked. So here's our Photomatics photo. Let's take a look at that. Put it in develop mode. So you guys remember that house that we looked at. So that's nice and clear. Clouds are nice and clear. You can see the entire sun. Our ghosted bird up here looks pretty good. Remember, like I said, I didn't do deghosting because I didn't want to take the time for that. Overall, it's a good file to get back out. Everything looks pretty good here. And the camera didn't move, so I didn't need to do alignment. All right, let's try something else. Let's do the Infuse module, because this is pretty cool. This is donationware, by the way, this Infuse module. And this thing really surprised me. So if you go out and look at HDR software, it averages around $100 for most pieces of software. I think you can get like Photomatics on sale for 89 bucks. I might have a code that you can get, 10 or 15% off on. You can get Aurora HDR. We're going to look at that tonight too as well. The rest of these things I'm going to show you, though, do not process in 32-bit. But I think it's important to look at them because not everybody has like a supercomputer that they can run these big 32-bit files. If I do a 32-bit HDR panorama, it uses just about all of my 64 gigs of RAM to handle moving that file around. And so if you don't have that, you may be forced to use 16-bit. So I wanted to show you the best of the best in that world as well. So we're going to start out with Infuse, and the reason this installs as a plugin, so you have to come over here to File and then down to the plugin extras, and you'll see blend exposures using LR Infuse. So I'm going to go ahead and click that, and then you get this crazy all of this crazy stuff, and you really only set this up once, and then after that you're only going to be doing like these two things right here. So you've got like different options for contrasting, and this contrast window is the same as that slider we moved in Photoshop, by the way. So it doesn't actually affect the file, it just says this is what the preview will look like. I just leave it everything basic. I didn't actually change anything here other than setting it to 16-bit TIFF, no compression. You can put this on Pro Photo. That's what I use for my profile in editing, not what I export, but editing. And then I just have it appending a file name so I know what the difference is. And then infuse your images. And this works in the background as well, so I can go ahead and now I can mark this file. We're going to give this file a 5 as well because it's my personal favorite, and then we'll compare it to the other 5 from Photoshop, and we'll look at the differences there after Infuse gets done working on its file. That's cool, Jan. So HDR is it was the reason I got into photography. I was a videographer before I learned photography, and I like to render things, so I did like 3D art and that sort of stuff. So I never really did photography, and a friend came to me one time and he's like, "Hey man, you gotta check out this new thing called HDR." And I saw these European artists who were doing this amazing HDR that looked like rendered photos of these old abandoned places, and for me it was just like an art style that I was like, wow, I can make that. And he showed me Photomatics, and I was doing all the crazy HDR stuff and everything sucked and it was all fluorescent and I didn't know what I was doing. And I suffered a lot of criticism for my photos, and I guess that just drove me to learn the best case use of HDR and why I want to use it. Like, I was using it for everything, and I'm like, but why? I can process these cool photos and make them look all sorts of artsy weird, but is that what I really want? Like, yeah, just because you can do it doesn't mean that's what you really want. So it was some years later, once I had learned the technique and how to figure out what light was right and what light was wrong, because your light meter doesn't always tell you. You can set it at 0. It's not always correct for HDR, and it's not always correct for a middle exposure. There are sometimes it's not. It depends on the percentage of white and percentage of darks that you're kind of throwing at the meter. So sometimes your meter can be wrong. But anyway, it was just through his introduction to photography that in this HDR, it got me interested in photography as a thing. I had done a lot of film stuff when I was a kid, but nothing serious. I had exposure, but not. I didn't didn't make it a thing, a passion of mine. So the HDR really drove me to that. So I've been doing that since the beginning, and I've used just about every HDR program going. I've used anything from Nik Effects to On One has one now. We'll look at that here in a bit if that'll run. Nik. Photoshop introduced it. There's what is it? There's like mechanical HDR. There's like a ton of them. I looked today. There's probably like 25 HDR programs. And for me, if they don't do 32-bit, they are all of them are kind of, yeah, Mike, I'm streaming in 2K. So all of them are kind of like they just don't cut it for me. If I can't do 32-bit and get that raw file, that raw data, I usually don't use it, and that's just a personal preference. So mechanical HDR is, from what I hear, is really good. A lot of people like it for natural HDR. So, all right, let's look at this file. We got to load this one. We do have to sync because it did not load back in. Infuse doesn't load it back in for some reason. So we're going to synchronize. You'll see one photo appears here. I'll hit synchronize. It'll load that photo in, and it'll come to here. It didn't used to do this, come to this import thing. I hate this. So we'll just hit import. Then it'll go here, and then I got to click back on the folder, and there we go. All right, so now it's back. It's in the mix. So it's the one here that doesn't have stars on it. So let's look at this, and this will be markedly different from all the other stuff. Look at this. Look at that. That's like, I mean, even the histogram. Look at how different the histogram looks. So this program does things a little differently. It doesn't use an algorithm, I don't think, as much to balance the tones as it does to actually mask things in. So it'll mask the sky in automatically and bring that layer forward and so on and so forth. So this is just, even though this is a 16-bit file, I think. Let's just check it to make sure, because you never know with these programs. So let's show it in Explorer. I'll grab the file data here. I know it's a big file. Yeah, so this is odd, right? So this file is 321 megabytes. So it's smaller than the Photomatics HDR and the Photoshop HDR, which we know are both 32-bit. But it's larger than the DNG file, which makes sense because the DNG files are compressed somewhat. So they're supposed to be lossless compression. So it is what it is. So let's look at the details though. So the size is right. DPI is 300. Bit depth though here is 64. So we even have another like weirdness. But the resolution unit is 2, which makes me believe that there may be like 2 layers of processing going on. And so that's 2 times 32, which makes 64-bit. That might be what they're doing. So this might be a 32-bit file. I have not reached out to Infuse to find out whether or not they are releasing a 32-bit file back to us. And I mean to do that. I just actually reinstalled this. I purchased this a while back. The thing that's great about this program that I like is that the developer's very active. He's constantly making improvements on suggestions by the users, and it's donationware. So you can give him $10 for this program. You know, it's like you pay what you think it's worth. I think that's really an awesome way to go. So you can get into HDR fairly inexpensively. You help him out by providing feedback, and he helps you out by giving you an awesome program to use. So let's look closely at this file and try to, let's create a little bit of, it's a little too flat in that there's light everywhere. So I kind of want to bring a little contrast back to this. So I'm going to bring, let me get to, can I have the, I want the medium contrast with curves. There it is, okay. That's better. All right, so I'm getting a little heady with the contrast, but so I'm going to try to move these peaks back a little bit to balance this shot a little bit. So we're getting a little bit more in the wheelhouse. It's more contrasty. It's a little less saturated too, if you notice. But if you look in here, it looks pretty good. Now, one thing I did notice about this is this actually comes in with 0 sharpening, like none. And you really, to put to get it to compare to all the other ones, you do want to put it on 40 because that's what every other file comes back into Lightroom as is 40. So we'll put it on 40. So that's a pretty good comparison. Let's look at the let's look at Photomatics. Get in the same spot here so you guys aren't confused. So there's the Photomatics. We could go, 2 to 1 isn't really fair because 2 to 1 now we're doubling the pixels and everything's going to kind of look fuzzy. 2 to 1's usually, I usually use that for finding like imperfections in the photo or stuff I'm trying to remove, but I don't use it to look at, whether or not it's sharp or not. 1 to 1 is as sharp as it's going to be. So let's look at that compared to, here's the one from Infuse. Let it load. So Infuse holds up pretty good, I think. And we're gonna process the Photomatics. So Photomatics, you might say, well, the sky's blown out, but that's not really true because all I need to do to get this to show up now is just balance it a little bit more. So now we're a little closer to what you see in Infuse. Infuse did a little bit better job, I think, with the sky. I kind of like this sky a little bit better. And this might be a case where, and I've done this before, I'll process in Infuse, I'll process in Photomatics, I'll take them both into Photoshop and I'll use the sky from one, or maybe I'll use the original sky and I'll overlay them and use both layers. So I'll use the one layer for the sky, one layer for the houses. It just depends. I mean, here's the deal. You caught all of the light, so that's why you do that, is so you can use it all in your photo. I'm not altering, like I'm not pasting in a boat or changing the sky or any of that stuff. I'm just basically getting the light balanced to where it looked like it did when I was there and what my eyes could see. And cameras just aren't to that level yet. Someday, maybe. All right, so we got one more program to run here in comparison. And that's Aurora HDR. You guys have heard me talk about it before. So let's do Aurora HDR and see how that goes. Now, Aurora HDR has a couple of ways that you can export the files into. You can either use the right-click method and use export, and then you can come up here on the menu and you can say export open source files, which is no processing, that's no white balance, it's no anything, no camera profiles, nothing. I mean, it's just takes the file and puts it in Aurora. Or you can edit copy with Lightroom adjustments. Now, that tells me right there that the file's going in as a 16-bit. So that's not really a bad thing. It's only a 24-bit file anyway, but it is taking some of the data away, right? It is taking, I'm losing 8 bits. of compression to get over there. So you can go either way that way. So I don't like to lose that. I would rather deal with any lens distortion I have after the fact. So I will send it in using the alternate method, which is coming over to program or plug in extras on the file menu, and then transfer to Aurora HDR. So we'll go ahead and click that. Those 5 files are going to make their way over to this screen because you know everything has to start over here because I'm doing the show over here. So yeah, that's how they start. So let me bring this over. There you go. All right. So this is Aurora HDR. We click the gear here. We're going to denoise it. No chromatic aberrations because there aren't any. We don't use alignment because it was on a tripod. None is needed. Create HDR, and we're off to the races. Aurora HDR is pretty fast. I will say that. It is definitely fast. Excuse me, had to get a drink there. I think that the main thing for me with Aurora HDR is it feels like it's not quite there yet. It only processes 16-bit images. I have tried to get a 32-bit image out of it. It just will not. A 32-bit image will not come out of this program. But it will save what I think is a 32-bit image as an MPAUR file. And I'm pretty sure that I can load that file in Luminar, even though I can't load it in anything else. And when I tried to do it originally, it would not load the whole data. So we might try that tonight just to see what we get. All right, so immediately this loads up. Suddenly it has this HDR look to it. It's blue. It's weird looking. The tones are off for sure from what it was a very golden evening. So I'm not going to do any processing in Aurora because I really don't use it for that. But what I want to do is make sure that everything is flat in here. So I made a preset earlier of my own where I flattened everything out. So it's basically 0 hero and it just goes through and it flattens everything to flat. So you see a small change there going on. Now what I can do is 2 ways to do this. If I hit apply, it's just going to send it back to Lightroom as a 16-bit TIFF file. But if I hit file and save, it'll actually bring up this little bit of, and it'll save it here as the MPAUR2 file. I guess that's MacFun, or which they used to be called before they became Skylum. I think that's MacFun Aurora 2018, but it's, you know, just their way of naming it. So let me save it like that. We'll open up Luminar and see if we can open that file. I know I tried it before. It loaded the file, but it wouldn't display it. It looked horrible. So, all right. So now to get it back into Lightroom, once we've saved that off, that's not necessary really. That's just for later experimentation. We're going to hit click apply and it's just going to send it back to Lightroom. So we'll do that. And the program is exporting the image back to the original file folder. We'll give it a second here because this is again, a 200 megabyte maybe. I don't know what it ends up being. Let's see here. All right, there it goes. It's back. I don't recall. I don't think it pops up here. I think, again, we have to go to our library. We have to right-click on the folder that we processed out of. Click Synchronize. There it shows up as a new, it shows up there. Hit Synchronize. Then hit Import. And then click back on the folder. And then it appears. I don't know why they can't get that to be less amount of steps, but it works for some programs, doesn't work for others. It's very strange. So here's our file, and it looks a lot different. And that's because there was no processing done to this image. There was no color profile. There was no anything when it went over to Aurora. So it just basically got nothing. So if I change this to, if I try to change this to more of the sunset look, it gets a little closer. If we look at some of the other files, it's not bad. We obviously will add contrast and do everything to it. But if I look close to this image suffers exactly the same problem as the Lightroom image suffers. Let's look at our Lightroom image. Here's the Lightroom image. And remember what we did to Lightroom image to get this sharpness. Look how it looks now. Let's go back to Aurora. Look at if you can see that, there's quite a bit of loss of sharpness. So let's get down and look at the sharpness. So sharpening is off. So let's turn up the sharpening to 40% and see what we get. All right, that looks pretty good. Let's compare it now to the Photomatics sharpness. Photomatics is still sharper. How about we compare it now to the twice sharpened Photoshop file? You guys are sticking with me, right? All these different programs. It's not as sharp as the Photoshop file. I don't know if you guys can see that. So ultimately, to get the Aurora file to be as sharp as everything else, it's got to go to that 80% as well. And there we go. Now it has the sharpness that everything else does. So to me, that means that I'm having to make some changes here in order to get the file to perform as well as the Photomatics file performed right out of the gate. Like I don't have to do all these steps with the Photomatics file. And the reason why I like the 32-bit and the reason why I use it and the reason why you would want to use this is that the 32-bit file gives me a full 15 stops of light to work with. So I get all of it though. I can go from completely black to completely white in one file. So I'm able to control all of that. And if I blow this file out and you look close, only in the very darkest areas do you see this noise. If I got this back into a respectable level with everything still blown out, still there's very little noise in the shadows, in the darkest areas of this photo where there was no light originally. In the middle exposure, I can now see under these buildings and see all this texture, and I can get all that detail. Now, I'm not going to use all of that, but it's nice to know it's there in case I need it, especially if you're like a real estate shooter and you're shooting inside with bright windows. You need to get the outside to equalize with the inside. That's where HDR is huge, because you can actually get those windows to equalize and you can tone them down so that they're not blown out. And I first learned this technique shooting in abandoned buildings. Very dark, no light, right? You don't even have lights in your room to use. So I had to get that exposure even with the outdoors. So it's a huge range of light to cover. So that's why you'd want to use it. In this situation, it was so I could better control the shadows and the details. So if I bring this back to a middle exposure, here's where it shines. So see, now we've got all of these dark spots down here. And even if I crank up the shadows, it's still pitch black. Remember, it was bright underneath there, right? Look at that. We can actually see there's actual beams under there. So what I can do is I can now use the middle adjustment, get the photo the way I want to. And now I can move in close and work on the shadows if I want to. And if I want to bring out detail in certain shadows, I can click on my adjustment brush. I'm going to go ahead and turn on the mask overlay so you can actually see it. And I'm just going to lightly paint. I'm going to use a lower density brush here with a big feather on it. I'm just going to lightly paint into these areas. So just painting in here. Just getting this lightly coated. And I just want to show you that if I wanted that detail under there, I actually have the ability now. I'm going to turn the mask overlay off. And now if I boost the shadows even more, you'll start to see that I can control the exposure and those shadows and bring out that detail of those pillars where there was no light before. So I have super control over those, whereas normally in just one exposure, I wouldn't have that kind of control. And so you can see it here with it on. And then if I, let's see, I think the backslash key, that's with it off. So, I mean, there's just so much light there that we're missing in the file that we have control over. And that's why I like to use HDR. It's not to get like a garish look or anything like that. Like if I was to work on this photo to get it the way I wanted to, I would probably tone down a little bit on the saturation, bring up the, I like it very warm. It was a very warm evening, so I want to kind of portray that. I like good contrast. So now you can see the sunset's really starting to come in. And then I would probably pull back a little bit on my vibrance. Vibrance is the blues in the shadows. Remember that in HDR. And saturation is the oranges in the highlights. So that's an easy way to remember those two. If I turn this up, the orange turns up. You see that? Okay. If I turn up the vibrance, the blues and the shadows turn up. See the blue here around the door start to appear? That's because I'm boosting that area of the shadow around that door. So I usually pull the vibrance back a little bit because I don't want it to be too much. So essentially, out of all these programs we talked about, I use two. I use Photomatics 32-bit, no real surprise there. And I also use Photoshop, and I use them for two different reasons. I use Photoshop because it does an excellent job at images that have absolutely no ghosting in them at all. If you want a natural image, quick, Photoshop works really great. I don't have to go to an outside program. I get a 32-bit file back. Everything's great, looks good, very natural, all of that. I use Photomatics when I need to do deghosting, like removing that bird that's in the sky, or I have maybe I'm doing a waterfall and the waterfall movement is over the many exposures is too noisy, and I want the water to be smooth. I'll take that one smooth frame and I'll use that for the deghosting on that, or I have leaves moving. So there are two different case scenarios: Photoshop for non-moving things and Photomatics for moving things. If I had a little bit lower end computer and I wanted to process in 16-bit, I would highly suggest that you look at Aurora HDR. I'm not going to suggest or load up On One simply right now because I don't think On One's HDR is ready for public consumption yet. I think it still needs work. In my feelings, I don't think it's quite there. So I would probably suggest for those folks Aurora HDR if you're not going to mess with 32-bit yet and you just want to learn, or Infuse, which is amazing. I really love Infuse, but it only works for certain things. So if you just wanted to get started like in HDR, Infuse is a great way to go. You're supporting an independent programmer, which I always love to do. Those guys, I mean, Mike knows this. We talk about Unraid all the time. It's written by independent open source coders, amazing software. And stuff like Infuse, I love that. I use the Lightroom Fader. I don't know if you guys have ever seen this before, but there's a program called LR Fader. And it comes as a plugin. It's fairly inexpensive. The Fader, it's called. And if you load it up, it does a cool thing that you normally don't get to see in Lightroom, which is you can fade in and out a preset. So I'm going to show you my high tension fade out. Here's my high tension fade out. Now that might be too much for some people. It's a little, you know, Walking Dead. But you can control the whole level of the preset with one fader. And if you notice the adjustments over on the right-hand side when I move this, it's moving them all. Isn't that cool? So it's absolutely a really good, you know, because a lot of these things when they come out, they're too strong, right? They're just not. So here's a couple of my new ones. We'll just show these real quick. Here's Dreamscape. So out of the box, I mean, look at that. It's just like crazy, right? But you don't want that much of it. You can actually just add a little bit of it, a little bit, 9%. So the fader is pretty cool. This is my pink sunsets. If you want a pink sunset, there you go. And again, it's really strong, but you can dial it back. So it's pretty cool. That's called the fader. If you guys are interested in that, I can give you a link to that. And I'll in this video, I'm going to provide links to all of the stuff that I talked about tonight. If you're interested in any of it, go check it out, Infuse and all that stuff. After I get the video produced, I'll go ahead and put that in there for you guys. One last thing I want to do before we go, because we're going to wrap this up. We're working on an hour here. I want to load up Luminar and see if we can load that file from Aurora. Let's see if they've made any progress, because I mentioned this to them a long time ago, and I don't know if they've ever done anything with it. So here's Luminar. Here's the file right there. We're going to drag and drop it and see what happens. Could blow up. So here we go. Well, can't open it. So let's see if we can open it with Open Image. So that'd be interesting if you guys can find it in all my folders here. All right, travel. All right, there it is. And it's called, no, it's not even showing it as a file that we can load. Is it even showing it as a nothing? So yeah. So what we used to this is all supported images, and it's definitely not showing here. We can load all of these. Like let's try to load a 16-bit. Let's try to load this. Yeah, let's load this one. This is a 482 megabyte file. Now this is a 32-bit file, and as far as I know, this will work in Luminar. So let's try it, because it did. I have done it before, and it's worked. So cross your fingers. Let's see if it'll work. It'll either work or things will catch on fire. All right, there it goes. So it worked perfect. So I probably, and usually when I get past the 32-bit creation stage, then Luminar is kind of my go-to program after that. So I love to process my stuff in Luminar after. Now you can see it's a very flat file, and I'd have to do a lot of work to this. You know, I'll load in my, we've talked about this, my Lightroom setup, and this is very, you know, I kind of know all this by heart here. So we can boost up the shadows. We can pull back the highlights. It's a little different engine, so it does work a little bit differently. You can see I probably might drop the AI filter in here and let that kind of do a little work too. Let's see what that does to it. You can boost that up. So yeah, look at how it's only boosting a certain area, right? Kind of that area I was showing you guys that I was working on. So that's kind of cool as well. So anyways, no, you can't get a 32-bit file out of Aurora, but you know, there's plenty of other options out there. So I hope you guys enjoyed this stream. I had a lot of fun doing it. If you work for Adobe, would love to know the truth. I don't know if the truth is out there. I would love to know it. But as far as I can tell, and as far as I can see from the files and what I'm looking at, it does not look to me like there's a 32-bit file that comes out of Lightroom processing. I'm not seeing it. It doesn't have the controllability and processing power that we can get from Photomatics. So for me, Photomatics, I like Infuse, that's up there, and Photoshop are my recommendations for 32-bit, Aurora HDR for 16-bit. All right, guys? Cool. Hope you enjoyed this presentation. You know it was brought to you by you. You guys support my channel over at patreon.com. You know it was brought to you by you. You guys support my channel over at patreon.com. And it's thecreators.com. That's all about you guys. And give me suggestions for your videos. Anything that you can throw out there, I would love to do. So if you come up with an idea, feel free to email it to me or post it on Patreon or ask questions, and I will definitely get in there and do a video. So we've already done some. I know Marge had a question. I did a thing for her. It was no problem at all. So it actually helped me. I actually learned from it because I learned how to stream one of my devices that I couldn't stream before live. So that's going to help. No, it was brought to you by you. You guys support my channel over at patreon.com. No, it was brought to you by you. You guys support my channel over at patreon.com. And it's thecreators.com. That's all about you guys. And give me suggestions for your videos. Anything that you can throw out there, I would love to do. So if you come up with an idea, feel free to email it to me or post it on Patreon or ask questions, and I will definitely get in there and do a video. So we've already done some. I know Marge had a question. I did a thing for her. It was no problem at all. So it actually helped me. I actually learned from it because I learned how to stream one of my devices that I couldn't stream before live. So that's going to help with next week's stream. So we'll see you guys